Hi, everybody. I am Mark Graban from KaiNexus, and thank you for joining us for episode 22 of Ask Us Anything, where we address questions that you've submitted to us. And we're joined today by Greg Jacobson. If you want to say hi and introduce yourself.
Hello, everyone. My name is Greg Jacobson. I'm the CEO and co-founder of KaiNexus, and I'm excited. I think this is what Ask Us Anything number 22.
It is number 22. Oh, so we've probably, we get to about 5 questions per episode, so we've probably answered more than 100 questions. All the past episodes are on the KaiNexus YouTube channel. If anyone wants to check that out, there is a playlist of those episodes. And I am going to also plug, since I just released it today, Greg, you are a good sport. You were willing to go first. Within our podcast series, we're doing a series of short interviews with members of the KaiNexus team. So Greg was on there talking about what he does as CEO and co-founder, and talking about maybe we'll make this the first Ask Us Anything as a way to maybe get people listening to the podcast. Don't tell the whole story, but what is the one thing that you talked about that you're really passionate about outside of work?
Squash.
The sport or the vegetable?
I discovered the sport squash when I moved to Austin, or back to Austin in 2009, and have been essentially playing ever since. And it's just a great way to get exercise and burn off some steam, and to kind of keep my mind mentally sharp. At KaiNexus, one of the things that we've talked about in the past, Mark, is just kind of this recognizing that this balance of work and outside life actually makes your work better. And so squash has been a lot of fun. And I'll tell you, I also talk about water bottles in my 5 to 7 minute interview with you. So won't give up anything else, but take a listen to that. And I think it's a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun to do, and I think it'll be a lot of fun for folks to realize kind of what the team consists of and what everyone's role is. Sometimes it's not as obvious as it might seem.
Yeah. All right, so let's get into the questions that people have submitted. And, we try to do these Ask Us Anythings every month or two, and we end up with a backlog of questions. So if anyone tuned in because you asked a question a couple of days ago, maybe we should rethink this, but we might not get to those questions until an episode or two down the road. But we will get to your questions eventually. But here's a question. Just ask, what processes would you like to see most improved at your clients' companies? I'll start first with this one. This is to me a personal principle and something that's really important. I would love to see people start by working on safety concerns, whether that's employee safety in any setting, ergonomics, in healthcare. Employee safety is important. Patient safety is, of course, really critical. But other than that, I think there's good lessons that go back to Taiichi Ono and his advice that says start from need and looking at what are your most pressing needs. So I think for each organization, you need to ask, what are your most pressing needs? And that should point back to the processes that should be improved. What do you think, Greg?
I think I'm going to kind of turn the question on its head, because had I gone first, safety would have probably been mine as well, because safety directly relates to either employees or customer or patients' lives. And having a medical background, that's something dear to my heart. But what has been such an interesting journey for me is just to see the breadth of the type of improvements that are now being managed in KaiNexus. So, we started as a completely healthcare organization. Now, healthcare only comprises about 30 to 40% of our customers. And so it's been an interesting exploration to see the types of things that people are working on. And I'll tell you, the things that really get me jazzed are improvements where it's very clear that it's coming from a frontline person. It's very clear that probably leaders wouldn't have ever thought of it, and would have been ignored or not even addressed. And so the types of process enhancements that really get me excited are either, hey, why are we doing this? There's absolutely no value to doing this. We're doing this just because it's the way we've always done it. And then the kind of the aha moment of truly adding value to the customer or patient, where it was just a tiny little tweak, and all of a sudden you just kind of unlock this huge amount of potential. I kind of think of like a dam just kind of opening up and really just a lot of energy coming out. So those are the kinds of things that I think fire us up the most here at KaiNexus.
Yeah. So let's move on to another question. What questions do you get asked the most from potential KaiNexus customers? And maybe we can each pick a question. What's a common question or a recent question, Greg?
Well, aside from kind of the tactical type of questions of, what devices does the platform, work on, and kind of the technical type questions, which I think are kind of mundane and probably not what this question is really getting to. I think a lot of the question / maybe underlying frustration behind the question comes from CI or PI experts that are really trying to figure out how to engage more people to understand the importance of continuous improvement and process improvement, and then trying to figure out like how do you light a fire under a company to realize that this is probably strategically one of the most important things to get right in a company. And I'll tell you, if we had a magic answer for that, we would tell you. There's certainly areas, look at, starting with why, look at engaging your leaders, look at leader standard work. And but if there was kind of one answer that fit everyone's kind of company or situation, then it probably wouldn't be hard to develop a culture of continuous improvement. This would be an interesting problem to solve. But I think that's a recurring theme that I hear, and I really can't help but notice that kind of underlying frustration in the tone of the question.
Yeah. And I mean, I'll answer this, trying to think back. I mean, I should go back through the whole history of all the questions that have been submitted. I think for this Ask Us Anything, we get asked probably the most about culture, leadership behaviors. We get asked a lot of questions about the non-tactical aspect of how do we do improvement? How do we create an environment where improvement can happen? And the other questions we're going to touch on today, a lot of those touch on those same things. Another question here: what role do you think training or certifications should play in Lean? Maybe I'll take a first stab at this. I mean, I think there's two dimensions to that question. One is training or knowledge are important. Training, knowledge that can come from books, webinars, classes, things like that. But I think with Lean, probably the most important thing is learning by doing and practicing Lean. I like that phrase very much. I try to live that. We're practicing Lean. Hopefully, we're getting better at it over time. We're human. We're gonna make mistakes. Hopefully, they're not huge mistakes, and hopefully, we learn from those mistakes and get better. And so, practice, I think, is better having a coach, a qualified mentor to work with you. And then, in terms of certifications, it's interesting where Six Sigma is so associated with belts of various colors. Lean doesn't really have a tradition of that. There are people go through the whole career in Toyota. They might get certified in particularly Toyota methods, but they're not given some sort of hierarchical color or ranking or certification. So, I think that those two can go hand in hand. You have people with high levels of certification who maybe don't have much experience, or you might have people with a lot of knowledge and experience who don't have the formal credential. I mean, Greg, I'm curious what you think, what you hear from people on this.
Yeah, to me, I think you kind of stole my thunder when you mentioned that.
Sorry.
The best kind of learning. I'll just kind of expound upon it. Talk a little bit about what I experienced when I was teaching these concepts to residents at the beginning of my journey. But the adults learn by doing, and I don't think there's a role in someone spending 3 months, 6 months, etc., learning and then saying, okay, well, now you're an expert in the body of knowledge, and now let's go do this type of stuff. I think that's like the absolute wrong way to do it. If there's several kind of lines through there. If you look at the way, for example, medical, the kind of lectures I went to when I was in medical school, they were very based in kind of topic of the knowledge. And then as the 20 years have gone by since I've been to medical school, really lectures get into use cases and patient cases, because it's interesting, and you can be like, okay, cool, I'm going to present a case to you. And then in that activity of presenting the case and kind of treating the fictitious patient, you then can insert a, kind of 2 to 3 minutes of kind of lecture knowledge about that, but it's in context. And, you're doing 90, maybe, 180 seconds on something. That's going to be, the uptake on that is going to be much better, because we remember things in stories. That's why oral traditions are related to stories. And so I think if we can, do as little of training as possible to get someone to go do some improvement, and then if that improvement is a good place, for example, to, this is where we use a 5 whys, or this is where we use a fishbone, it's going to be a lot more meaningful to someone to do that in a real application versus kind of a fictitious application.
Yeah, so I think it goes back to the words of Taiichi Ono: start from need. When there's a need, learn something and apply it and practice it. I'm with you. Doing lots and lots and lots of training, education before going and doing anything. I think people forget if they don't get to go and apply something right away. And when I was at MIT 20 years ago, our professors who were teaching TQM, or total quality management, now they teach Lean and Six Sigma. There's an evolution of that, but they talked about this model of learn do, learn do. In the context of Lean, you might say that's smaller batches of learning. I think we see this in the KaiNexus training modules. There's lots of little small snippets, and there's longer kind of webinar training classes that the customer experience team does. So if you have the need, I was doing this the other day. I was trying to figure out how to change the colors in an image, and the software I had downloaded, and I went to the web. I had a question, I had a need, and there was text, and then there was a video that said, here's how you do that. I'm like, okay, well, I can go and do that.
Right.
That was more effective than saying, well, I'm going to be using, let's say I started using some new podcasting software. I'm going to go to a 3-day class on the software to learn everything I could possibly learn about the software. If there's even 3 days worth of stuff to learn, I'm going to learn by doing and pull on help as it's needed.
There's an expression in medicine, especially education, academic medicine, of see one, do one, teach one. And that kind of reinforcement is I think the best way to teach folks. So I would not place a lot of emphasis in long training or extensive certification, and try to kind of move towards a coaching model in kind of the just-in-time mentality. So
yeah. All right, well, here's a question. I think it's pronounced Blake. How can we maintain a robust leadership development program? I feel like we're trending in the right direction, but it seems like every solution brings another hurdle. So I like, not to sound too flippant, but that's how life goes, right? I mean, every countermeasure or solution or whatever word you might use, every time we change something, that either exposes a new hurdle, or sometimes we make an improvement that has a side effect someplace else. And I mean, my advice, Blake, if you're watching, is just to keep at it and realize that that's normal. Don't beat yourself up if you're thinking, if you're blaming yourself because there's hurdles or we didn't anticipate that. I think those are the cycles of improvement, and I would encourage you to not give up and view those hurdles as the new challenge instead of it being a setback.
I'm reminded, Mark, and you showed this of the PDSA cycle almost being like someone going up a staircase. So you kind of do this, and then you're gonna, maybe that staircase should almost be like a little bit down, because I feel like with any system, and there's going to be entropy, and so there just has to be a lot of energy inserted into that, and certainly there's going to need to be new ways to think about and to excite people and to get them emotional about it. And I don't think that means that the prior one was a failure. That the prior one was just what got you through that last week, month, quarter, year, whatever the duration of that was. So but so I think the key here is the trending in the right direction. That's, I think, the key.
Yeah. All right, here's a question from Brian. My favorite part of Lean is Kaizen events and the improvements that result. Sadly, in most organizations, a lack of sustainment typically occurs. What are your experiences with sustainment? So I'll share some thoughts on this. So a lot of times I get brought in to organizations to sort of diagnose, if you will, looking at the organization as a patient. I'm an engineer, not a doctor, but people might say, well, we're struggling with Lean. Can you come in and try to help figure out what's going on? And in a lot of cases, I think what gets described as a lack of sustainment is like the evidence of that, or the symptom of that would be, we did a Kaizen event. We came back 90 days later. People were using the old pre-Kaizen event method. Therefore, the change that was implemented never got sustained. But I think a lot of times the failure mode is that in a Kaizen event, people develop a new method, or they develop a hypothesis of a new method, and they might hopefully test it during the Kaizen event. But then there's often like a really poor handoff to the people that are going to have to be running that work every day and supervising that work. And so a lot of times when you really peel it back and you look at what happened, the change was never really adopted to begin with.
Right.
And I think that's there's a different countermeasure required for that, to ask, well, what can we do to improve the handoff? Are we engaging the right people? Make sure we don't have outside experts swarming in and saying, oh, here, we fixed it for you, just do it that way. Like I wouldn't expect that to sustain. And unfortunately that happens sometimes. So I think asking why is really helpful. And if there's something that seems like lack of sustainment, just keep asking why until you work your way back to either why it wasn't adopted or why people went back to the old way or to a different way altogether. What are your thoughts, Greg?
And I think a lot of this really comes down to leadership, whether it's kind of the local leadership or whether it's kind of more senior leadership, of understanding the types of changes that were made. I know here internally at KaiNexus, when we make a decision collectively, hey, we're going to change a process, and then the very next time that process occurs, if we do the old process, if someone doesn't say, hey, wait a minute, we all agreed we were going to do this differently, and not in a you're punishing kind of way, but just in a, hey, I thought we were going to try to do this differently, and these were the reasons why we all agreed on this. So there is it takes a while to break a habit and to start a new habit, and essentially that's what we're really talking about. And so I think there's no question in my mind that someone being told what the new process is going to adopt it at a much less success rate than someone that was a part of developing the new process. But even myself, when I say, okay, I'm going to do this a new way, I will find myself reverting back to kind of the old comfortable mental models that I'm used to. And so there is a little bit of, during the interview that you did with me, Mark, I called myself the agitator, right? Mm-hmm. And I mean that in a positive way, just to say, hey, wait, let's stop here for a second. All right, let's think through this. And so I think a lot of that results in the whether it's and I say leader, so it can be any kind of level of leader there, saying, oh well, hey, we did the event, and my job is done now. Well, in many ways, your job is just at the beginning to now make sure that the new standard makes sense and that it's being followed. So,
I mean, I think that's one of the keys is confirming that it makes sense, because whether it's sustainment of a change from a Kaizen event or standardized work in general, I was taught that, if it appears that people are not following the standardized work, asking why in different ways, like you're trying not to breed defensiveness. It's not, a lot of this is in tone. It's not, why aren't you doing it? But it could be more like, well, help me understand, like you said, I thought we agreed we're going to do it this way. Are there legitimate barriers to doing it that way? And being open to that. And that's part of a PDSA cycle. And then I think there's also a difference between saying, well, I cannot do it that way, or I will not. Like, are there barriers, or is it a choice? And if there are barriers, you've got to work to eliminate the barriers. If someone still thinks a different way of doing it is better, I think that requires coaching instead of kind of the old, authoritarian, formal authority. I'm the boss. You need to do it that way, because then people will just get better at hiding the way they're really doing it, and that's not a good thing. All right, we've got a question here from Luke. It's a fairly long question. I'll try to cut it down a little bit. But he says he took over his company's continuous improvement program, and he's being asked for a major overhaul. They've had the program for 10 years, and engagement has been dwindling as the company grows. We've had decent engagement in some parts of the companies, but resistance from our office departments. It's clear that the CI program has become more of an IT request system. It's become too financially focused, where even small ideas need to prove financial value before implementation. So my first step is to send out a survey for people to share their feedback so I can fully understand the current state. I've had dozens of conversations with leaders and employees, and have gotten a lot of great ideas from them. So the questions I have are, what are some of the most valuable questions to ask in a company-wide survey about CI? And a second question, CI department that does not improve itself is not living up to the name. I would agree with that. What are some new things companies are doing to keep their program fresh and engaging? So my first reaction to this question, and going back and rereading it, when Luke was asking, what are good questions to ask for a survey? My first thought was, well, I don't know if you really get as much from a survey as you do from face-to-face conversations. And it sounds like Luke has been doing that. It sounds like from what he typed there, there are a number of issues there that could be addressed. As we were talking about a minute ago, if there's resistance from the office departments, go and try to understand why that is. I would go talk to people in the office departments, and figure out why are they not engaged about continuous improvement. There could be a number of causes for that. I think the idea, there's a clear countermeasure around helping people move away from a strictly financial focus. You maybe try to reinvigorate a CI program by going back to basics and engaging people and lots and lots of small ideas. Fix what bugs you. Fix things related to safety and quality, things that are maybe a little bit more difficult to put in the dollar terms, and let people implement a lot of improvements that don't have a big eye-popping ROI, because that's how you build the culture and participation that then eventually leads to big results. So those are some of my thoughts. Greg, do you have other thoughts, or you want to talk about, I'm sure you run across KaiNexus customers who do innovative things to improve the way they improve, if you want to touch on that or anything else from Luke.
Yeah, it's interesting because it's a long question. So in preparing for this, I picked out some things, and then when you read it out loud, I was processing it in different ways. So I picked out other things, and when you read it out loud to me, I couldn't help but think that there's probably some leadership change in there, and there's probably, in this case, a lack of training going on. And so I know it almost sounds contradictory to the prior answer, but I think that there's, probably 5 to 10% of a CI kind of organization should be on kind of reminding why we do this and reemphasizing the why and talking about, I mean, they really switched almost to, it says an IT request system. Well, that's not at all what, I mean, so there something was lost there as the company got bigger. I'll bet the percent effort of kind of talking about why we do continuous improvement relative to the size shrunk dramatically. I mean, if you have 10 people and you have one person that's really kind of emphasizing this, is much easier to kind of disseminate that emotion, that kind of reasoning, versus if you have 100 or 1,000 people. To have that same ratio, you would literally need to have 100 coaches or 100 people behind it. And so I would imagine that the kind of the person who started this or the efforts around this at the beginning were diluted over time. And so that, because I think if you play the telephone game with CI, which starts out like as a Kaizen minded suggestion that really focuses on, you know, small, low cost, low risk, non-value added stuff, like those types of things, by the end almost it could become an IT request system. I could imagine. And so I would probably become a little bit more introspective. I didn't pick up on the survey aspect that hey, you're going to get some information from a survey. You'll probably get more information, certainly narrower because you can't talk to every single person you can survey, but probably more valuable information by just going to picking out some people from the survey and say, hey, Mark, can I book 10, 15 minutes, you know, have a cup of coffee with you, and maybe use the survey as a jumping off point to talk about. And then one of the things I see is changing things up a little bit, now kind of answering the question of what we see. So I've seen the workout process work really well to kind of reinvigorate things at an organization. So they'll do maybe a 90-day, 100-day workout, and then things will kind of go on, and then to kind of reinvigorate, hey, let's circle the wagons again. Maybe we'll do a workout and we'll focus on, you know, safety or finance or satisfaction, or just have a different theme. I think those are really easy ways to kind of re-engage and kind of agitate again. To like all the mud has settled, and it's like, okay, we've gotten really too comfortable. Let's shake it up again. So I think kind of doing a little bit of that flipping back and forth, I think helps people to not think something's boring.
Yeah. I mean, I think, you know, awareness, you know, when you say there's a lack of training, it could be a lack of awareness.
That might be
and people turn over in organizations to say, well, we introduced this 10 years ago. How much of the organization is turned over in 10 years? There's going to be ongoing discussion. A lot of that hopefully comes from the behavior and the communication from leaders on a daily basis, not just in training. But one other thought, you know, that came to mind when looking about the survey, I'd be curious what would happen if you borrowed like two key questions that come from motivational interviewing. Because a lot of times we talk about barriers to improvement, and one thing I've learned from motivational interviewing is that when you ask people to talk about barriers, you end up creating negative reinforcement. People, when they talk about their barriers, we might think that's problem solving, but I think there's an interesting psychology of where dwelling on the negative is sort of, demoralizing. But I think there's two questions from motivational interviewing. You'd ask people on a scale of 1 to 10, how committed are you to continuous improvement in your area, with 10 being really highly committed and 1 being not at all committed. And then the second question would be, how confident are you in your ability to participate in continuous improvement on a scale of 1 to 10? So I would look for the numerical answers, and then the follow-up question is, if you answered X, why did you say that instead of 1? And now you get people articulating some of the positives, and that might be something to help reinforce and build upon instead of focusing on barriers. That's one way my thinking has been challenged in recent years. I used to always focus on what are the barriers, let's eliminate them. But I think there's risk in that. Hey, Greg, I'm not hearing you suddenly.
Oh, excuse me. I mentioned I was dealing with a cold, so whenever I'm coughing, I'm trying to mute. So, Remind me, Mark, you at the KaiNexus user conference, which is being rebranded as KaiNexicon this year. You did a little bit. You did a really nice talk, not a little bit. You did a really nice talk on motivational interviewing. Yep.
Right.
And have you done a webinar on?
There was one of the KaiNexus webinars.
It might be time to revisit that type of knowledge. I mean, that was really powerful, and I, I love when things don't really seem like lean, but they really are lean. And for example, Duhigg is the example I always go to. The Power of Habit is it's not a lean book, but really, if you think about how do you practice lean or how do you develop a culture of continuous improvement, that's all understanding exactly how habits are formed and those processes. So I'll either have to go back and rewatch the webinar you gave, or maybe I can poke and prod you to doing and revisiting the topic.
I can revisit that. I put a link to the webinar in the chat box.
Perfect.
I'll post a link under the video in YouTube. But if you go and search KaiNexus webinars, the webinar was called Bottom-Up Improvement, Finding Strength in Numbers. So you can find that. But we should go ahead and wrap up. 30 minutes, once again, has gone very quickly, but I think we got through a wide range of questions, and we've got plenty of questions lined up. We're definitely going to do an episode 23, right?
Absolutely.
So keep an eye out
during episode 23.
Yeah. So as we wrap up here, I want to thank everyone for tuning in. I'm going to make one gratuitous plug here. It's a bit of an offer, and then Greg, see if you want to mention something too. So my most recent book, this is what we call a galley copy. So it's kind of an early, there's still typos and things to be fixed, paperback version of my book, Measures of Success, which is supposed to be I think it'll be available by the end of March if things stay on track. But in the meantime, I'm doing a giveaway on my blog for 3 ebook copies. So if you go to leanblog.org and there's a banner across the top or at the end of each post, there's a little graphic about how to enter that contest. That contest is still going on for another 6 days. And I would encourage people, if they're interested in the idea of metrics and how to improve the way they improve through something you can see, there's a picture there, process behavior chart, as we call it. I'm giving away 3 copies of the ebook. So again, go to leanblog.org and look for that.
And please, you will do yourself a favor if you don't understand some of the basic rules behind them, or when to use, or how to think through process behavior charts, or you may have heard of them in the past called control charts. Take a look at Mark's book. It's very consumable. We've all read it here at KaiNexus, and he's given even little 15, 30-minute talks on it just as recently as our annual meeting last month. I think it really challenges your brain into understanding what is signal and what is really not signal, and what is really just static behind the data. And I think it'll ultimately it will allow you to focus on important things and ignore non-important things, especially as related to data. So please check it out.
Well, thanks. That's a good summary. And is there anything else You mentioned KaiNexicon. Do you want to say a little bit more about that for the KaiNexus customers?
Please, if you are a KaiNexus customer, then there's no question that the value you'll get at coming to KaiNexicon in 2019 is going to be huge. We have limited spots this year. We're taking a little bit different approach in that we've literally set the boundaries for it, and we get a ton of different customers from a lot of different industries all in rooms together. We do a lot of meet and greet, and we did this, the best thing I think we did last year is we almost did, it was like a lunch dating kind of scenario where everyone had about 2 to 3 to 4 minutes to show people how they're using KaiNexus, and it really blows our minds to see how people have configured KaiNexus and are using KaiNexus to support their CI efforts. But it's certainly, people walk away with being invigorated. So one of the questions was, hey, what are some revolutionary things companies are doing? You will find 40 or 50 of those by coming to KaiNexus, especially if you're a KaiNexus customer. That's the design for that conference. So please check it out on our website.
All right. I hope people will do that. Go to KaiNexus.com. Greg, as always, thanks for doing these, and we'll look forward to the next one. We'll look forward to more questions from the KaiNexus community. So thanks everyone for tuning in.
Thank you. Have a good afternoon, everybody.